Thanks for joining me today, guys. In this video, I'd like to provide an overview for anyone new to the Fujifilm system and the Fujifilm Film Simulations. I myself don't know too much about shooting the film simulations in JPEG. Normally when I'm doing my landscape, I shoot RAW, but hopefully by doing this video, I can learn a little bit of something and pass that on to you viewing this video here today. We'll go over what the film simulations are and why you might want to try them out. We'll do a comparison of each film simulation, show you how to tweak the simulations and customize them in camera or customize them on your computer using Fuji X-Raw Studio. And then I'll share some of my favorite recipes that I found on the web from other photographers out there. Let's get started. Thanks again for joining me today. If you're new to this channel, I'm a landscape photographer, mainly shooting landscapes, but also interested in other types of photography. I like to do videos on photo tips, tricks, and camera gear reviews. And if any of that interests you, please do consider hitting the subscribe button below and ring the notification bell for new videos as they come out. Now with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the Fujifilm Film Simulations. So what are the Fujifilm Film Simulations? Well, basically just like any other camera company, the film simulations are camera profiles that apply a specific tone curve to the raw images to give you a final JPEG output. In the Fujifilm system, however, it's a little bit different in that they base their film simulations or their profiles off of actual film stock that was available in the past or is still available now. Film stocks like Velvia, Provia, and Superia, which is the classic negative, are available as film simulations with the Fujifilm X series system. To me, the film simulations found in the Fujifilm system seem a little bit more thought out when you compare it to the camera profiles of the other camera companies. Honestly, I haven't shot film since learning on it when I first started photography and honestly don't have a desire to go back. But for casual photography where you want that quote-unquote film look, I think these film sims can satisfy most digital shooters wanting that look in certain situations. Of course, if you need the real deal, there's no replacing that, but it doesn't mean that these simulations can't be fun or even useful to even the most critical of film shooters. Now let's go over the film simulations found in the XT4. I'll break them up into color simulations and black and white simulations. At the time of shooting this video, the Fujifilm XT4 is most up to date with the newest film simulations like classic negative and bleach bypass. But remember, if you're shooting with any of the older Fuji models, know that you won't have access to all of the film simulations that you might find in the XT4 or even the X Pro 3. For the color simulations, we first have Provia. This is Fuji's standard picture profile. They describe it as being something that can be used in a wide range of scenes. If you want something that is semi-true to life without much shifting of hues, something not very stylized, this is a good place to start. Now let's see how changing to the other color profiles compares to the standard Provia. Remember, this is just a general comparison to get you going. When we mention color saturation and contrast, there's definitely more to it than going up or down in intensity, but I'm just going to keep it semi-general for this intro comparison. Now we have Velvia. This simulation will crank up the contrast and saturation of your scene. Fuji lists this as being ideal for landscapes. If you want colors and contrast to pop, this is the one for you. Depending on the situation, it can work really well. I've actually found it to overcook the images sometimes, but you can dial it back depending on the final look you want, and I'll go into how to tweak the simulations a little later. Now we have Astia. This simulation is supposed to have a softer and more subdued feel to the overall image and skin tones. The film version was supposed to be really good for portraits and fashion. When I compare it to Provia, it seems to have a touch more saturation without going too far like Velvia might do in some viewers' eyes. I do notice that the images do look a little softer too, almost a subtle Orton effect, or as if you turn down the clarity in something like Lightroom or Capture One. The next three film simulations I'll talk about are Eterna, Pro Negative Standard, and Pro Negative High. These film simulations seem to be very similar in color rendition, with the only thing differing between them is the contrast to my eye. Eterna is Fuji's most neutral profile. It's supposed to be softer to give a more cinematic look. Fuji video shooters like to use it because with the contrast turned all the way down, it's a very flat profile that can be easier to color grade versus F-Log. For photos though, in my opinion, it can be too flat, but it can be a nice profile to work with if you insist on shooting JPEG and still want room to tweak the color and contrast in post. If you're going to edit your photos a lot, I would still recommend shooting in RAW for the most flexibility. Pro Negative High and Pro Negative Standard, as you can see from these comparisons, basically just change the contrast and in turn the saturation of Eterna. There's likely some hue shifts going on if we were really to analyze it, but from the eye test and to keep things simple, I'm essentially just seeing the contrast changes. The Pro Neg Standard is supposed to be good for portraits and skin tones, with the Pro Neg High providing more contrast when you need it without oversaturating the colors. Now we come to the more stylized film simulations. We have Classic Chrome, Classic Negative, and Eterna Bleach Bypass. Classic Chrome is one of the most popular of all the simulations, and some might say it's overused. It's definitely got that Instagram ready look to it, which is probably why it's so popular. Its color is less saturated and the tones seem to be very balanced within the image. This balance makes it a great starting point for a lot of custom JPEG recipes. Next we have Classic Negative. This is supposed to be modeled after Fuji Superia film. To my eye personally, it's very green in the shadows with a harder tone to the overall image. I really liked this when it first came out on the X Pro 3 and glad it was made available on the XT4. It's got a retro look to it that can work if used in the right situations. Eterna Bleach Bypass is brand new with the XT4. If you've seen movies like Minority Report or Saving Private Ryan, I've read these films were processed with this technique. Essentially, it is as the name says it is. The bleaching part of the film development is skipped, and this gives a low saturation and high contrast look. Now let's move on to the black and white film simulations. We have two types of black and white images in the Fujifilm cameras. We have acros and we have monochrome. Now, this isn't really a 100% accurate explanation on what these film simulations are doing, but for simplicity's sake, let's say that monochrome is like dialing down the saturation slider in Lightroom all the way to 0 and maybe adjusting the contrast a little bit, whereas acros is taking that same monochrome image and increasing the contrast just a little bit. Let's compare. Here's monochrome and here's acros. Notice the change in contrast. Now you might have noticed there are a handful of options for the acros and monochrome sims. These include +G, +R, +YE, and these are basically simulating what happens when you apply a green, red, or yellow filter over your lens to affect contrast when shooting black and white film. When you shoot in black and white, each color is interpreted as a shade of gray in the final image. Without the filter, colors might be converted to similar shades of gray, resulting in an image where shades of gray turn out very similarly and nothing really stands out in your image. When a filter is applied, you can get a certain color to stand out. For example, with this shot, we want the red to stand out, so we apply the acros +R, and you can see the red is brighter versus the standard acros. Red is allowed to pass through the simulated red filter, causing it to come out brighter. Watch the green in this shot with the green filter, and now watch the yellow in this shot with the yellow filter. So why might you want to use the film simulations in your workflow? Well, if you're just shooting for fun and not wanting to edit things, not wanting to spend a lot of time in front of the computer, the film simulations provide something that is really good straight out of the box, something that you can share on Instagram and really not worry about it. So really it's just about having something straight out of the box. Also, the film simulations can be something that you can use to apply a creative constraint to your workflow. By creative constraint, I mean maybe you can pick one film simulation for the day, stick with that simulation, and when you're out in the field, you don't have to worry about the look that you're going to get because you already know that you're sticking to that one simulation. In the end, it'll force you to focus on technical aspects of shooting as well as the composition of your shooting when you're out in the field rather than the final look. So adding that creative constraint can sometimes help you get some of the creative juices flowing when you're feeling stuck in your photography. Now, for those of you that really don't like spending a lot of time in front of the computer editing your shots, but you don't want to give up full control, what you can do is modify each of the JPEGs and the color profiles to fit your liking. You can adjust contrast, you can adjust the color, and I'll show you how to do that in a few ways here. First, you can use the menu to adjust all the parameters possible. Here in the IQ tab, you can select your base simulation, add simulated film grain, making it weak or strong, small or large, adding special effects like color chrome. Color chrome is supposed to deepen colors in the shadows without shifting hues too much. You can adjust the white balance and also shift the colors in the white balance. Change the dynamic range, which essentially allows you to adjust how much highlight and shadow detail is retained, which you can control even further by adjusting the tone curve. Watch the effects of the tone curve in this example. It basically works the same as changing the tone curve in Lightroom or Capture One, only with less control. You can adjust the color up and down, you can adjust the sharpness, noise reduction, and the clarity, which is essentially mid-tone contrast to make the images pop a little more, and a handful of other things. Once you've dialed it just the way you like, you can save it as a custom profile by going to page 3 of the IQ tab and going to Edit, Save, Custom Setting. Select the custom number and select Save Current Settings. After that, you can also rename the custom setting. Now when you want to go for your specific custom look, you can just quickly hit the Q button, set one of your Q menu button boxes to allow for select custom setting, and quickly scroll to your desired recipe. Notice the settings change as we scroll from setting to setting. Now keep in mind this is just a quick overview on what you can do with the film simulations and each different setting. Make sure that you play around with the different settings, tweaking them up and down to get the look that is just right for you. Now, if you're not yet ready to commit to shooting JPEGs only, you can still shoot in RAW and convert the RAW after the fact using the Q button. And let's show you how to do that right now. After hitting play, you can scroll through all of your RAW images. Once you find the one that you want to convert to a JPEG, hit the Q button and the RAW conversion tool opens up. You can adjust all of the settings you had access to after the fact when you shoot in RAW. When you're ready to convert, just click Q to create and click OK to save the JPEG. Once the JPEG is saved, you can take a look here at the before and after. Here's the RAW file, and here's the JPEG file. Now the problem with editing with the Q button is that you're looking at the tiny screen at the final result, and it might not be exactly what you want. So that's where the XRaw Studio comes into play, where you can view the final result on the big screen as you're making those adjustments. So let's show you how to use the Fuji X-Raw Studio. To get XRaw Studio, first go to the Fuji website and download the app. Once installed, connect your camera to the computer via USB, turn the camera on, and you're all set to go. Once your camera's on, you can see here on the top, it'll tell you which camera is connected. Right now I have the Fujifilm XT4. Also on the left, you have your source image folder, so you can browse all of your folders to find the photograph that you want to work on. They've got a histogram here on the left, as well as the image information and all of the XF data for the shot that you took. Here in the middle, we have our viewer, and here on the right, we have all of our custom settings that we can adjust here. Everything from pushing and pulling the exposure all the way to changing the white balance and everything else like the tone curve and etc. On the bottom, we have our film strip so we can select which file we want to work on. And let's just go ahead and do an example here. I've got this shot off the coast of California, and what I'm seeing is that the shadows look a little bit dark. I do want to saturate a little bit to make this sky here pop a little bit. So what we'll do, just as a simple demonstration, is I'll bump the shadows up to +2, and you can see in real time it'll show you what's going on there. Now it's kind of counterintuitive, and I sort of did that on purpose just to show you that it's sort of counterintuitive with the tone curve here. So +2, you would think you're bumping the shadows up, but instead you're increasing the contrast in those dark areas, and it makes everything a little bit darker. So the effect that I want instead is to go to -2, so those shadows will be bumped up. So you can see it's a little bit brighter on the bottom. Now with the highlights, let's just say we thought we blew them out just a little bit. It really doesn't look too bad, but just as an example, we'll click -2. And once it does its thing, it'll darken those shadows a little bit. It's a little bit tough to see on this, and it's not as obvious. And now let's go ahead and increase the color, +2. And you can see in real time, it'll show you those changes and the effects of those adjustments. And then once you're finished with your adjustments, all you have to do is click convert, and it'll save it as a JPEG. And it actually saves it in the same folder. One great thing about the XRaw Studio is you really don't have to worry about Fujifilm worms, as you're getting the native conversion straight from the camera when you're converting the RAW into a JPEG. Another thing I'd like to point out here in the XRaw Studio is on the right side, if you have any custom profiles or custom recipes saved inside of your camera, you can actually just apply those directly to the RAW files. So you can see here, they probably won't work the same as I intended them to, but just as an example, for custom 2, let's say I felt like I wanted to convert this image into Kodachrome, all I have to do is click that and XRaw Studio will apply those settings to the selected file. And you can see that doesn't really look very good, but again, just as an example. Now, one thing to note when you're using the Fujifilm XRaw Studio is that you need to use the exact same camera model that was used to shoot your photos. So let's say you have some old XT3 photos still on your computer and you want to convert those using XRaw Studio, you actually need an XT3 to be able to access the conversion. If you try to use the XT4, the application will not recognize it and you won't be able to convert those XT3 files. So that's kind of a bummer that you need the same camera, and let's say you sold your camera, again, you won't be able to access it anymore. The good thing is that Capture One actually has the Fuji Film Simulations available for your specific camera, and those film simulations are very similar to the actual in-camera simulations that you get from the RAW conversion with the in-camera processor. Capture One film simulations are very accurate to my eye. I wouldn't say they're 100% accurate, but they're very close, and you really wouldn't be able to tell unless you're pixel peeping and comparing side by side. So let's take a look and you can actually judge for yourself. As I'm watching this during playback during the editing session, I'm noticing that the Capture One versions are really more contrasty and more saturated than the in-camera conversions. But I do notice that the hue shifts aren't really that bad, and they actually do look very close when I'm viewing this on a calibrated monitor. So keep in mind, if you're doing Capture One conversions, to turn the contrast and the saturation down if you want to get something that more closely matches the in-camera conversions. When people talk about Fujifilm, they talk about the Fuji colors, they talk about the dials, and also they talk about the Fujifilm Film Simulations. For me, the film sims are probably why I'll always keep at least one Fujifilm camera in the bag as long as I'm practicing photography. They really are fun to use, and they look amazing coming straight out of the box. They allow you to tweak them just a little bit so you don't have to sacrifice complete creativity, and you can get a look that is right for what you're shooting. There are some really great photographers out there doing some really nice things with these Fujifilm film simulations. They're coming up with recipes to match old film stock that they like, and I'll leave a link down below to check those out. One of the websites is fujixweekly.com, I believe, and the photographer that runs that site shares a lot of recipes that are very useful out in the field. One of the favorite recipes that I've gotten from that website is Portra 160 and Portra 400, and I've had a lot of fun using those, just taking snapshots, family snapshots. So check that website out, it's down below. Well, that's all we have for this film simulation video for Fuji. If you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, make sure to click subscribe down below, ring the notification bell, hit the like button, as it really does help this channel stay alive.